There's a butcher's shop in the north of England, where the price tags are still written by hand. Queue out the door before 9. Not a chain store in sight for 3 streets in any direction. The ironmonger 2 doors down sells individual screws from a wooden drawer. The baker opens at 6 and sells out by 10. The optician has been in the same family since the Festival of Britain. None of this is a heritage project. Nobody decided to preserve it. These streets look like this because they never stopped working long enough to be replaced. This is a map of the places the homogenization machine somehow missed. 10 towns where the high street still functions the way high streets were supposed to. Independent shops only, no chains, no brand guidelines, no head office in another country making the decisions. The question underneath every single one of them is the same. Why here? And why is that question getting more urgent by the year? The floor of Hexham's covered market is original Victorian tile. Nobody has ever stripped it out, not because it's listed, but because nobody ever wanted to. That detail is the whole story of this town. 20 miles west of Newcastle, in the Tyne Valley, Hexham is a proper agricultural service town, and its market hall looks the way it did when your grandparents used it. Independent deli, family jeweler, outdoor gear shop that sells things for actual outdoor use, an ironmonger where the staff know what everything is for. The reason the high street stayed intact isn't nostalgia. Local trade kept it alive long before the discovery wave arrived. Newcastle professionals priced out of the city have been finding Hexham for a few years now. What they find is a town that was already functioning, not one waiting to be saved. The trade-off is real. Wages in the surrounding area are low, and commercial rents stayed depressed long enough for independent businesses to survive. A place that looks preserved is actually just one that never collapsed. The retired farmer who still buys his fence wire from the same shop his father used isn't heritage exhibit. He's the reason the shop is still there. Hexham isn't frozen, it just never broke. That is exactly what people said about Ludlow until the food writers arrived. Most people think Ludlow's independent high street is a middle-class food tourism project, a curated collection of artisan producers that materialized once the gastro reputation was established. It's the wrong way round. Southern Shropshire, perched above the River Teme, 25 miles from Hereford, already had the independent high street, multiple family butchers competing with each other, an independent wine merchant, a hardware shop that sells paint by the tin, not by the lifestyle brand. The market on the square isn't performing marketness for cameras, it's just a market. What the food tourism did was bring money in without homogenizing the thing people came to see. It selectively upgraded independent businesses rather than replacing them with chains. Ludlow has more award-winning food per square mile than anywhere in England. It also has a proper spa. The trade-off is that property prices have climbed hard enough that the young people who grew up here mostly can't afford to open a new independent business here now. The couple who moved from London 15 years ago to open a deli are now the establishment, watching the next wave arrive and recognizing the logic entirely too well. Tourism doesn't always homogenize, but only if the bones were right before the tourists got there. How does a town with some of the highest property prices in West Yorkshire still have an independent high street that looks nothing like anywhere else? Hebden Bridge is 8 miles from Halifax, 20 from both Leeds and Manchester, and the answer is not reassuring. The original wave of artists and alternative settlers who arrived in the 70s set cultural norms so strong that chain retail has never felt welcome, and the community has organized repeatedly to keep it that way. The result is an independent bookshop, a vegetarian cafe that has been there since 1984, a record shop, a craft supplies place, a health food store that sells herbs by weight. The high street reflects actual local identity, rather than what a corporate algorithm thinks a town needs. But the town is now so expensive and so socially curated that the original working class community has been almost entirely priced out. What does it mean to save a high street if you price out everyone who built it? The textile worker's grandchild who grew up in Hebden Bridge now commutes back from Bradford. That's the only way to stay close to family. The most successfully independent high street in the north of England is in one of the most unaffordable towns in the north of England. Hebden Bridge didn't preserve its high street. It replaced one monoculture with another, and the second one photographs better. 178. That is the number of listed buildings in Faversham town centre, and it is the real reason the independent high street survived. 9 miles from the M2, 50 minutes to St Pancras, sitting squarely inside the London commuter belt, installing a standard chain retail fit-out in a listed building is expensive, complicated, and frequently impossible. So the chains went elsewhere, and the independent butcher, greengrocer, fishmonger, baker with bread actually made on the premises, and a proper local post office stayed. The primary school teacher who bought here in 2019 because it was the last commutable place she could afford with a garden is now watching the same logic bring 200 more people just like her. The architecture that kept chains out is now the selling point, drawing in exactly the buyers who will change the character the architecture preserved. Faversham's independent high street survived because a chain couldn't afford to strip the plaster off the walls. That detail is the whole story, and the story is moving faster now. You may know Barnard Castle for reasons unrelated to its excellent selection of independent hardware. In Teesdale, 16 miles from Darlington, at the edge of the North Pennines, the town became internationally recognisable after 2020 for an episode that had nothing to do with what it actually is. What the coverage missed was that Barnard Castle has one of the most intact independent high streets in the north of England. An independent hardware store, a family greengrocer, a butcher who still makes his own black pudding, and antique shops selling actual antiques rather than upcycled furniture. The attraction is prices that still make sense for the local economy. The trade-off is that the local economy is not strong. The independent high street partly reflects low commercial demand, not just community virtue. The young couple who searched for the cheapest market towns in England with a real high street and moved from Leeds in 2021 can't quite believe nobody else has noticed yet. Barnard Castle was famous for a week for entirely the wrong thing. The right thing was always the view from the main street. Totnes is where this argument gets uncomfortable. South Devon, 5 miles from Dartmouth, 8 from Torquay, on the River Dart, and the most ideologically independent high street in England, is also one of the most expensive small towns in the southwest. Hold both of those things at once, because you need to. 0 chain stores, not approximately 0, 0. Verified, deliberate, and collectively enforced. Independent bookshop, independent cinema, health food shops, artisan businesses as far as you can see. The decades-long experiment in local currency and conscious anti-chain retail worked. It actually worked. Totnes has proved you can keep a high street entirely independent. It has also proved that doing so can turn a working town into an unaffordable boutique version of itself. The local nurses, teachers, and tradespeople who keep the town functioning cannot afford to live in it. The electrician who services the dream homes of the people who moved to Totnes to live differently drives 40 minutes each way, every day, doing in reverse the exact journey his customers made once to arrive. The town answered the question of whether a high street can stay independent. The answer is yes. The answer is also a warning about what independence costs and who ends up paying it. Alston doesn't have a theory. The highest market town in England, 28 miles from Penrith, in the North Pennines, has an independent high street for one reason. No chain has ever thought the numbers would work at this altitude. The main street tilts at a gradient most shopping trolleys couldn't manage, and every shop on it is independent because nothing else makes economic sense up here. The ironmonger is there because someone needs an ironmonger. The butcher is there because someone needs a butcher. The post office sells welly boots because that is what people need the post office to sell. Alston is 1,000 feet above sea level. The nearest Tesco is 28 miles away. The nearest Costa is further. The high street adapted to fill the gap with things people actually need. The remoteness that preserved the high street is the same remoteness that has watched young people leave for generations. The district nurse, who covers 400 square miles from a base in the town shops locally because there is nowhere else to shop, and she does not experience that as a hardship. Alston is the independent high street with no ideology behind it, just necessity and the quiet dignity that comes with that. At what point does a town famous for being anti-corporate become a selling point for exactly the people who made everywhere else corporate? Stroud is in the Five Valleys, 8 miles from Cirencester, 12 from Gloucester, known as the most progressive small town in England, which is both accurate and slightly misleading. The independent market genuinely competes with the high street rather than supplementing it. The zero-waste shop, local bakeries, farm shops within walking distance, a record shop that people drive to from Bristol, all real, all thriving. But the culture that preserved the independent economy is now the town's most bankable asset in every estate agent's window. The graphic designer, who moved from Bristol in 2018 because Stroud was still real, is now watching a second wave of the same logic arrive, and is not entirely sure what that makes her. Stroud kept its high street independent by building an identity strong enough to resist chains. That identity is now doing to Stroud what chains do everywhere else. 12. The number of independently owned businesses on the main market square in Settle, North Yorkshire, unchanged for 20 years. 16 miles from Skipton in the Ribble Valley, halfway between the Dales and the Forest of Bowland, Settle has no ideology behind its high street whatsoever. It simply remained an agricultural service centre, and agricultural service centres need a butcher, a hardware shop, an ironmonger, an independent cafe, and a proper newsagent. The hill farmer who comes down on market day to do the shopping has been doing exactly this for 30 years. The entire independent economy is built around his routine and the 1,000 routines like his. The seasonal pressure from Dale's tourism makes year-round trading genuinely difficult, and one of the most perfectly intact independent high streets in England is in a town that has barely registered on any property investor radar. Yet, Settle doesn't need saving, doesn't need discovering, doesn't need explaining. It just needs to be left alone, which is exactly the thing least likely to happen now. Much Wenlock is 7 miles from Telford in southern Shropshire. It has under 3,000 people. The medieval Guildhall is still actually in use. It is home of the Wenlock Olympian Games, the direct precursor to the modern Olympics, organised here in the 1850s, decades before the international version existed. The shops clustered around that Guildhall are not lifestyle theatre. The butcher, the deli, and the hardware shop are infrastructure. None of these places planned to be on this list. They just didn't do what everywhere else did. Every town in this video kept its independent high street through some combination of geography, luck, active resistance, or the plain fact that collapse never quite arrived, not through policy, not through nostalgia, not through planning. And the ones that stayed intact are now the ones being found. Being found is the first step in the process that changes them. England didn't lose its independent high streets all at once. It lost them one lease renewal at a time. And these are the towns where, for reasons that are never quite the same twice, the landlord said yes to the butcher instead of no. The question isn't whether these places will change, it's whether the people discovering them understand that they are the change. If any of this sounds like somewhere you grew up and lost, or somewhere you're already thinking about moving to, the comment section is going to be worth reading.